Shocked, shamed, saddened. Cricket bosses react to the racism scandal engulfing the game. The England and Wales cricket board's been under fire all week after Azim Rafiq's revelations. Now the boss says there will be tangible action and says sorry.
Our sport did not welcome you. Our game did not accept you, as we should have done. We apologise unreservedly for the suffering you have faced.
Also tonight, 4 people, including 2 young children, die in a house fire, with details emerging of one of the victims' calls for help. £100 a year, that's how much it's going to cost customers as power companies keep collapsing. And the 6-year-old with 2 missions on her hands, fighting climate change and cancer.
Stop dropping litter around on the floor, really, and take more care of the environment.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. The head of cricket's governing body today described racism as a blight on the game and vowed to eradicate it from the sport. ECB Chief Executive Tom Harrison spoke after a crisis meeting of cricketing bodies was held to address damning allegations from former Yorkshire player Azim Rafiq. He said Rafiq's experiences had shocked, shamed and saddened everyone and promised there would be tangible change. It came as a former England cricketer became the latest to be embroiled in the racism scandal rocking the game. With the latest, here's our sports editor, Steve Scott.
At the Oval today, cricket bosses looked deep into the soul of the sport they run, a sport in turmoil over a racism scandal that escalates by the day. Former England captain Sir Andrew Strauss clear of the task ahead.
Well, we've got a lot of work to do, there's no doubt about it.
They met just hours after former England cricketer Alex Hales apologised for painting his face black for a fancy dress party 12 years ago.
I obviously realise that this is incredibly disrespectful and I want to apologise for the offence that this has no doubt caused. It was incredibly reckless and foolish on my behalf.
Hales was already under investigation for claims made by Azim Rafiq during his harrowing evidence to MPs earlier this week.
I know that the pain that I went through for them few months, no one can ever put me through that pain again.
Rafiq made an apology of his own yesterday after anti-Semitic messages he sent to another player in 2011 were unearthed and made public.
Azim Rafiq's comments and subsequent apology just reinforce the scale of the crisis being discussed here today. Racism has clearly been allowed to fester in cricket for some time, and even at the end of this week, it's unlikely we know the full extent of it.
After 5 hours of talking, they emerged with a promise of urgent action and an apology to Rafiq and all who've suffered like him.
Azim Rafiq has shone a light on our game that has shocked, shamed and saddened us all. Racism and discrimination is a blight on our game. To Azim and all of those who have suffered or experienced any form of discrimination in our sport, we are truly sorry. Our sport did not welcome you. Our game did not accept you, as we should have done. We apologise unreservedly for the suffering you have faced.
There have been many watershed moments this week. If today at the Oval doesn't genuinely prove to be another of them, then cricket still has a long and painful road to run.
But see, the ECB is under so much pressure to make some kind of meaningful change. But did they give any indication of what that would even look like?
Charlene, no real detail, to be honest. We did get a few platitudes. None of them was really radical. They said they'd take wide-ranging action to tackle discrimination and promote inclusion and diversity at all levels. They also said they'd talk about effective governance, and that sounds very dry, but if you think about it, it was missing at Yorkshire County Cricket in the first place, and then in the investigation that followed Azim Rafiq's allegations. We have been promised More details next week. The ECB boss, Tom Harrison, you've just heard from there, has been under a lot of pressure this week, not least because of his less than convincing performance in front of MPs. But he squashed speculation that his position was vulnerable. He said he was the right man to lead the job. But he'll now no longer be judged on how well England does at cricket, how much money he makes the ECB. He'll be judged on this issue alone and how quickly and effectively cricket can deal with it.
Indeed. Steve, thanks very much. A baby girl, a young boy and 2 women have died in a devastating house fire in South London. Firefighters were called to the scene around 8:30 last night. All 4 victims were pulled from the fire, but sadly died. 2 men were taken to hospital. Police believe all the victims are related. The cause of the fire is being investigated, but it's not thought to be suspicious. A warning, this report from Juliet Bremner has detail you may find upsetting.
As they approached the burnt-out remains of the house, relatives found it hard to conceal their grief. A young mother, her 4-year-old son, 18-month-old daughter and their grandmother all died in the inferno.
That's about 3 months. This house, they bought it about 3 months ago.
One man managed to jump from the first floor, but the rest of the family, originally from Sri Lanka, were trapped, to the distress of neighbours.
Absolutely heartbroken. I still feel very emotional about it. Having grandchildren and children myself, it's horrendous.
It's understood the older woman was upstairs packing, getting ready to fly to Sri Lanka, when the fire started on the ground floor. When the fire broke out at this house, the father was still at work. His wife called him, pleading with him to get back, apparently shouting out, "Fire, fire." He raced home, but it was too late to save any of his family. A cousin told us they had no words to comfort the father.
We've seen them recently in a wedding 2-3 weeks ago. Yeah, happy children.
For the community as a whole, this is just tragic, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is an absolute tragedy. You can't prepare for these kind of things.
In all, 40 firefighters arrived at the house, but they were unable to save the women and children.
At the moment, we don't have any information on what caused the fire, but that will be part of our ongoing investigation, working closely with the Metropolitan Police Service and specialist investigators.
It should have been a new chapter in a new home. Instead, a family has been destroyed. A father is facing the unimaginable pain of life on his own. Tonight, nearly 24 hours after a fire gutted a house in the street behind me, the road remains closed. All day, forensic investigators have been inside trying to pinpoint what may have caused this appalling tragedy. After speaking to family members, they believe that it's accidental, but of course they'll have to wait for the expert's verdict. One man remains in hospital tonight. He's believed to be a relative of the family who died. He broke his legs as he jumped to safety. The father was treated in hospital for smoke inhalation, but he has now been released and is being comforted by relatives.
Juliet, thank you. The bomb used in the Liverpool attack had ball bearings attached to it and could have caused significant injury or death, police said today. Ahmad al-Swamin died when his device exploded inside a taxi at the Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. The driver was injured but escaped alive. Double child killer Colin Pitchfork has been arrested and sent back to prison over a breach of his licence conditions. Pitchfork was freed in September after spending 33 years behind bars for the rape and murder of 15-year-olds Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. Well, Martha Fairley has joined us in the studio. And Martha, this was a highly controversial release in the first place. So what happens now?
Well, this evening, the probation service has confirmed that Colin Pitchfork has been returned to custody, where he's expected to remain pending further decisions about his future. Now, it's just 2 months, as you say, since he was released from prison after a parole board decided it was safe to do so. But under very strict conditions of his release, he was to remain under supervision for the rest of his life. He was jailed in 1988 for the rape and murder of 2 15-year-olds. Dawn Ashworth and Linda Mann in Leicestershire, and he was the first person to be convicted of rape and murder using DNA profiling. Now, we understand he was not recalled to prison for committing any further offences, but because the probation staff who'd been monitoring him had identified concerning behaviours, and in order to protect the public, the step was taken to return him to custody as a preventative measure. Now, in the past few minutes, the mother of Dawn Ashworth has said she's pleased he's been put away and says she feels it's a safer place when he's behind bars.
OK, Martha, thanks very much. The collapse of power companies will cost the average customer around £100, no matter which supplier they're with. That's the warning from the UK's biggest energy company, Centrica, which owns British Gas. So far this year, 24 providers have stopped trading. And Centrica's chief executive told ITV News that tougher regulations are needed. Here's our consumer editor, Chris Troy.
Out like a light, record wholesale gas prices have led to a string of energy firms disappearing from the market. Less well known is that even if you're not one of their customers, the crisis will cost you money. This mum is already struggling, but when firms go bust, there's a cost, which over time is passed on to bills, no matter what firm you're with.
The money that I budgeted to go in now doesn't cover it, which is why money's had to come out of other things like luxuries to cover that cost. Otherwise, then I have to go begging to people to help me. It's hard.
Energy firms with almost 2.5 million customers have collapsed since August. Surviving firms took on their customers, guaranteeing credit balances and supplies. These companies can recoup costs from an industry fund, paid from all our bills, so far estimated to be £2.5 billion, which could add £100 to every bill in the sector.
Utility Point recognises members for their loyalty.
The impact of energy companies like this failing comes on top of price rises due to increased wholesale costs. The chief executive of the UK's biggest power firm wants tougher checks on companies' business plans in future.
The cost of these failures are socialised across the entire customer base of the UK. It's very hard to argue that that is fair, that customers of companies like British Gas are subsidising the customers of companies that have failed. The regulations that we've got today, I don't think any party would argue are working as they have been intended.
Comparison sites often encourage people to switch to the cheapest deals, but should they have been more careful? Shouldn't people like you have done more to check out the financial viability of these companies before switching customers?
That's absolutely something that we do. We do not work with all suppliers, we work with a select few, and there is a process that we go through to understand who's the right supplier to work with.
Officials say new regulations are being considered, but as we enter the period of maximum energy use, many experts predict more suppliers will collapse. Chris Choi, ITV News.
In the past few minutes, a teenager has been cleared of murdering 2 men during racial justice protests in America. Kyle Rittenhouse was armed with a semi-automatic rifle when he killed 2 men and shot a third. He claimed self-defence. Well, let's go to Robert Moore in Washington now. Now, Robert, this is the end of a highly controversial and divisive trial, isn't it?
It certainly is, and this has been a trial over recent weeks that has absolutely gripped American viewers, because it was about so much. It wasn't just about what Kyle Rittenhouse did that night in Kenosha, in the small town in Wisconsin. It was also about gun rights. It was also about the right to self-defense, and also about vigilantes and those who self-style themselves as vigilantes in American streets. Kyle Rittenhouse was this, during all of that racial turmoil, was this sort of teenage gunman who opened fire as he was surrounded by some anti-racism protesters. As you say, when he opened fire, he killed 2, injured 1, and it led to this extraordinary court case over recent weeks. And just a few minutes ago, this was his reaction when he learnt of his acquittal.
Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts?
Well, you see he there collapsed in emotion, just giving you a sense of how febrile this trial was. And certainly over the next few nights in Kenosha itself, but also in nearby Chicago and other cities, there'll be real concern about whether there might be an upsurge in protests and indeed anger on the streets of America. So this is going to be closely watched, but this was an extraordinary trial that fed into the polarisation and the great debate about race that still rages here.
OK, Robert, thank you. Oh, still to come on the ITV Evening News. Well, the law is being tightened on the use of mobiles at the wheel and...
It tastes like strawberries, but you know it's not real strawberries. It's kind of like fake, but I've had worse medicines before, that's for sure.
The fruit-flavoured drug that's revolutionising treatment of life-changing genetic condition. That's after this short break. Welcome back. Any use of a handheld mobile phone while driving is to become illegal in the UK under new laws. Currently, drivers are banned from texting or making a phone call, but from next year, rules are being tightened to cover taking photos or videos and scrolling through music. It's aimed at reducing deaths and injuries caused by distracted drivers. Sangeeta Lal heard from one mother who says the new law might have saved her son's life.
Joe Kearns was just 14 years old when he was killed in a crash travelling with friends on their school bus. It was hit by an HGV whose driver was playing games on his phone at 50 miles an hour. Using a device in this way isn't technically illegal, something that'll change next year. But for Joe's mother, Steph, it's a change in the law that should have happened sooner, which she says might have saved her son.
He will never have another birthday celebration. He will never have another Christmas. He will never hug his mum again. So to find out that this man was completely distracted, you can't even describe what a waste of a beautiful life. This law can only be a good thing, just to bring it up again into people's thoughts.
The government says the change will make it easier to prosecute drivers and bring the law up to date, because last year 17 people were killed by drivers distracted while using their mobile phones on Britain's roads. 499 were injured, 114 of them seriously. Under current UK laws, drivers are only banned from two things while using a handheld device. Making calls and texting on your phone is illegal. Believe it or not, though, taking videos while driving and even playing on your phone isn't. That's all going to change next year. The question is whether that will really stop people from doing it. Charities warn this law doesn't identify all distractions.
I guess the next thing that's going to be looked at is whether or not actually if it's hands-free, is it still safe? And sadly, the stats tell us it's not.
Perhaps a change that may come in time. From next year, though, drivers caught scrolling playlists or playing games will be fined £200 with added points, an attempt to steer people away from prioritising their phones over the safety of others. Sangeeta Lal, ITV News, Manchester.
An NHS trust has been fined more than £2.5 million for safety failings after the deaths of two patients. Natalie Billingham and 14-year-old Casey Jane Robinson both had sepsis and died in separate incidents in 2018. The Dudley Group NHS Foundation Trust said it's deeply sorry for the failings, which it said it has learned from. A revolutionary treatment has been approved on the NHS to tackle a genetic condition which can kill babies and young children. Spinal muscular atrophy affects the nerves and can lead to paralysis, muscle weakness and a loss of mobility. But a new drug which can be taken at home as a syrup can dramatically slow down its progression. Our health editor Emily Morgan reports.
The Falcon sisters know no other way of life. They were diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy as toddlers.
Thanks for the food, Dad. It's really good.
The genetic conditions meant they've lost nerve cells, leaving them unable to walk.
It's definitely a lot of pain, but as time goes on, you kind of learn how to deal with it. and that's just how my life has been, and I can't see it differently anymore.
Now, a new drug given at home and now also available on the NHS is slowly changing their lives.
I used to have swallowing problems, and I couldn't swallow hard foods or anything, and now it's a lot better, and I can swallow whatever I want. It tastes like strawberries, but you know it's not real strawberries, it's kind of like fake, but I've had worse medicines before, that's for sure.
Around 1,500 people in the UK have the condition. Most of them in England could now benefit from risdiplam. It boosts the level of a protein in the body which is needed to control muscle movement. The drug costs almost £8,000 a vial, but the NHS is getting it for an undisclosed discount. It's the third revolutionary drug in 3 years to be offered on the NHS for SMA patients. 30 years ago, when the gene was discovered, it was a very different story.
They had a very poor prognosis with this condition and were never able to sit or stand or walk independently. They now, with these new treatments, achieve disabilities and they survive for longer. So clearly, for the newly diagnosed patient with spinal muscular atrophy, there is much brighter future ahead.
Campaigners are now pushing for babies to be screened for the disease at birth.
If you consider that every 5 days in the UK a baby is born with SMA, if we were able to treat them very soon after birth, they would then have the best possible chance of leading full and healthy lives.
The government is reviewing whether to screen at birth. For now, though, Shaya and Hermione's dad says he's only ever wanted a fulfilling life for his daughters. This new drug makes that more and more likely. Emily Morgan, ITV News.
And finally tonight, the 6-year-old whose inspiring efforts to save the planet have won her praise from Boris Johnson and Greta Thunberg. Flo Stores was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer early this year, but she's refusing to let that stop her campaigning, as she explained to our reporter Chloe Keedy.
There's help stop climate change.
6-year-old Flo isn't just passionate about saving the planet, she's busy doing what she can to help.
To turn off the lights when you're not in the room, and turn the tap off when you can, and if you can, ride your bike or walk or scoot to work.
What inspired you to get stuck in?
At assembly, we saw Greta on the screen, and then most of us got inspired, and most of us had a bit of tears running down our faces. Then when I went home, I told Mama and Dada, and a few days later, I made a poster.
When Flo celebrated her 6th birthday in August, her hero made a special appearance, and not just on the cake.
Hello Flo, my name is Greta Thunberg, and I just wanted to wish you a very happy 6th birthday, and I hope you have a wonderful day at your party. And I've heard about you, about everything that you have done, and I think you are a true role model.
How did you feel when you got a message from Greta herself?
It made me feel really excited and happy. She never responds to people, but she responded to me.
And she's not the only person that's responded to Flo.
Dear Florence, I am writing on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Flo has kept campaigning despite being diagnosed 3 months ago with a rare form of cancer. When she's not having treatment at hospital, she's fighting to raise awareness of climate change. And she has this message for the rest of us.
Stop dropping litter around on the floor, really, and take more care of the environment.
Chloe Keedy, ITV News, Atherstone.
That's it. Tom's here at 10. Bye-bye.